Thank you, Mr Turner. Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate and praise her for her compelling and persuasive arguments for keeping daytime output on BBC Local Radio. She talked about the good value in terms of the cost and the valued output. And I'd just quickly like to give a personal point of view to BBC Local Radio, because I'm very lucky. I've had two main careers in my life. For 10 years, I was a Royal Air Force officer, and then I completely changed tack. I decided I want to be a journalist. I did a postgraduate course in broadcast journalism, and like many of my other fellow students, I ended up working in BBC Local Radio. I did freelance shifts at BBC Radio Cleveland, which is now called BBC Radio Tees, and I also did some shifts at BBC Radio Leeds. And I experienced firsthand the importance and the localness of BBC Local Radio. I was sent off early in the morning in the BBC Local Radio car, which was a little Fiesta with a wobbly aerial on the top, and I would go to the place where it was actually happening, try and get people to talk about the issue, and it felt so live, it felt so immediate, it felt so local. And I've sort of experienced that. And in the BBC Local Radio stations where I worked, there was a fantastic mixture of the old hands, the characters, which we've already heard of, which have been there for very, very many years. But there was also the young, talented, ambitious people, which I didn't count myself as one, who have then gone on to national broadcasting careers. I only have to think of people on BBC Radio 5 Live, which I listen to a lot now. Richard Bacon and Victoria Derbyshire both started in BBC Local Radio. Now, I wouldn't dictate to BBC bosses, though I'm tempted to, how they should actually spend their money. But we've got to look at the facts and the figures. And one of the most compelling, I think, is the most recent listening figures, which show a weekly reach of 7.4 million in England for BBC Local Radio. That's an increase of 700,000 listeners in the previous year. And those figures don't surprise me, because I know the value of BBC Radio Leeds in my Colne Valley constituency, which is Huddersfield in West Yorkshire, and I must talk about the passionate football coverage. And it's an exciting time in West Yorkshire. Leeds United are going for promotion. My team, Huddersfield Town, are, and Bradford City are struggling to stay in the league, but it makes compelling listening. In fact, only on Saturday afternoon, I was out and about with my children, but I had BBC Radio Leeds on, and Paul Oggy Ogden was commentating on Huddersfield at Tranmere, and he actually lost his voice as he screamed the commentary on Novak's second goal at Tranmere, another vital win for Huddersfield Town. But it's that passion. He's a local lad, he lives down the road from me, and that's what we get from BBC Local Radio. I must declare an interest as well. I'm regularly on BBC Local Radio. Recently I've been on talking about Libya, Arts Council grants, and also maternity services at Huddersfield. They even have a feature on a Friday morning, Meet Your MP slot, which myself and my honourable friend here have been on recently, and other members, and I'm on it in a couple of weeks' time. So it's good for local democracy as well. Yeah, of course.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. In our soundbite era, would he agree perhaps that local BBC radio is often the only media outlet that has the patience and the care to do those in-depth interviews that really get to the bottom of a story?
That's a really good point my honourable friend there has made, because the Meet Your MP slot is actually for an hour, and it's all speech, there's no music there, and they do a mixture of going out and about and actually interviewing people, and you don't know what the questions are going to be, asking you issues, and you actually get a proper time to give the proper answers rather than just the short soundbite. So you've hit the nail on the head there. And we've also heard the value of BBC Local Radio when there is a crisis or a time when people are worried. And in my patch, we had very, very heavy snowfalls in the last 2 winters. And although it didn't make compelling radio, I know that parents and guardians were glued round their radio sets as they read out the list of 380 schools that were closed, and they did it on half-hourly cycles, and I know how valuable that service it was, and they probably had the highest ever listenership, and it was just list upon list upon list of schools. The parents or guardians were worrying about whether they'd had to take a day off work to look after the children. The children were jumping for joy when they could go sledging and throwing snowballs. But that's the kind of localness we get from BBC Local Radio. The honourable member for Penistone and Stocksbridge has also mentioned there's regionalisation already, and I was on the lunchtime phone-in show recently, and the presenter kept thinking she was still in Sheffield, even though she was across the Yorkshire region, and that is something the BBC are looking at already, and it already showed that it didn't necessarily work. BBC local radio needs to be local, and we hear in other recent debates in this place that we must protect the front line. There's nothing more front line than BBC local radio, so I hope the BBC will listen and that the Minister will pass that on from all of us here today. Thank you.